Hello, welcome to a presentation run by Signalise Co-op. We've got Nikki and myself, Jen, here today. I'll introduce us in a minute. So the presentation that we're talking about is Co-ops, COVID-19 and interpreters in the new economy. So I'm Jen Smith. I'm the founder of Signalise Co-op. I'm the previous chair of Nubsley, an interpreter of 14 years, and more recently also a web developer.
And I'm Nikki Evans. I'm the co-founder of Signalise Co-op, the founder of Nubsley, been an interpreter for 18 years. And according to Jen, I'm a political mastermind, which the only reason I allowed her to put that was because of my rubbish joke where I am stood on the left of Corbyn in my lovely picture.
So the CPD objectives for today are, we're going to talk about interpreting and the pandemic. So what happened and what does that tell us about the interpreting profession and how it's being affected by the pandemic? What we could have done differently throughout the pandemic, what we're seeing in the new trends in interpreting provision, and we're going to talk about the old economy, the new economy, what that all means and what it means for interpreting specifically. Then we're going to run through cooperatives, talk about what they are, what they mean, and we're also going to talk about what the future of interpreting could be and how we could reimagine that together. So, interpreting in the pandemic, what happened and what does that tell us?
So I'm sure you're all familiar with many of the logos you can see on screen. We've had to adapt and change our working methods completely. Most of us are now doing all our bookings remotely online. So a few of the apps you'll be familiar with are Zoom, Skype, Google Hangouts, Teams. There are loads of others. I did a COVID bingo recently, and most people are up to between 9 and 12 different apps that they're using on a daily basis. Then I'm sure you also know about the Where is the Interpreter campaign, which highlights the lack of access that we have here in the UK. It was set up by Lynn Stewart-Taylor, and she wasn't happy about the lack of a live BSL interpreter standing alongside the Prime Minister. We're one of the few countries in the world that hasn't managed this, and I think that gives a really clear indication of the way that deaf and disabled people are treated at the moment. What could have been different? So first we'll look quickly at what we did do as a community. Nubsley, I know, have provided a lot of support. Sorry, for those of you that don't know, Nubsley is the National Union of British Sign Language Interpreters, and they have been providing people with support around health and safety information. They've also been challenging agencies on things like cancellations when COVID lockdown started. Also, they've issued their position on VRS working, which again helps us when we're talking to agencies. There was also an agency who were using a premium rate telephone number for interpreters that needed support if they had problems providing remote interpreting. So those are the kinds of things Nubsley have been doing. Then we've had ASLI and VLP who have been doing a lot of work with members. They've been running surveys. There's been a lot of CPD opportunities and also peer support. And then we've had new things such as there's a Facebook group that Rachel Smith recently set up, and that is for BSL interpreting and translators group. And again, that's just to get the community talking more, which is really important at the moment. Then what could we have done differently as a community? So imagining what we would have been able to do if Signalise had been set up. First of all is we could have offered widespread free training on remote and video interpreting. I think a lot of assumptions are made that deaf people just automatically know how to use interpreting online software, and that they'll just be able to switch very easily. And actually that's not the case. I'm sure lots of you have been involved in helping deaf colleagues and friends and teaching them how to use the various platforms. then we would be able to consider what other training and information deaf people and interpreters needed to be able to work, particularly, for example, working safely if they had to go somewhere face-to-face where they could access PPE. We could have established regular community meetings to make sure we were continually talking to each other. We'd have been able to work in a more coordinated way with local communities, which we know have been doing amazing work through COVID. We'd have been able to provide information for workers on how to access government support. I know a lot of people had to do that and source that information on their own. We would have just been able to make sure everybody had the information they needed. We'd have looked at a faster and more coordinated response to our community needs, again, because we'd be in regular contact and those would have been established meetings already. It would just have been easier to find out each other's needs and what we could do as quickly as possible. So it just leads to a lot more in terms of joined up working. The new trends in interpreting provision. So COVID and remote interpreting, nearly all interpreting has now moved online. It's slowly starting to go back to face, but predominantly people are still home working. So that raises the issue of what sort of training do we need, how the profession will evolve. There was a recommendation that interpreters shouldn't be working solely online because it affects the way you interpret it, and also it has an impact on your skills. So interpreters ideally shouldn't be working remotely full time. So that needs to be considered as we move forwards. Will rights and working conditions be protected? This has already become an issue, and we've seen several agencies and also commissioners starting to talk about the need for moving everything online as a new normal. And that is seen as a way to erode fees and working conditions. Then we also need to consider the customers, so the public sector organisations and central government, and what are their expectations on the appropriate use of face-to-face interpreting. I think there's a lot of education that we need to be providing, because people don't understand that you don't necessarily pick up on everything. For services such as social services, for example, a lot of information that you would get by physically being in the same space is lost through remote interpreting. So it has huge implications, and that's all stuff that we need to be considering. Contract and frameworking. There are new frameworks emerging now. So we've got the new National Police Service Framework, which is due to run for the next 7 years. We've got version 2 of the Crown Commercial Service Framework, which has already been going for 4 years. But there's a huge disconnect in what they aim for and what is delivered. So social value, less travel, fair price, and whether they're deliverable. Just some of the issues we found with the current proposed frameworks are legislative requirements not being met, standards being an area of concern, interpreter safety not being considered, sustainability, unnecessary layers of administration, technical errors, which just shows that the people that are commissioning don't actually understand the job we do. And some of the very basic things are just shown from the errors that they've made in describing certain terms. Monitoring, again, we've had a problem for the last 4 years with the current frameworks, in the fact that there is no transparent monitoring of these, and we don't know how many complaints are being logged, for example. And then there's the award criteria and the method statements, which we've got a lot of concerns about, and just the general weighting of things, so quality over price and those sorts of issues. The only one positive that we can take from the new police service framework is that it's actually a dynamic purchasing system, which means that through the 7 years that it runs for, new suppliers can be approved. So that does give us an opportunity further down the line when we're fully up and running and established. And I think the frameworks and the new contracts just reinforces the importance of NUBSLI and having a union to represent us and challenge these at government level, because unions have more negotiating power and are recognised by government, so it gives us more opportunity to challenge. Hand over to Jen.
Thank you. So COVID-19 and agency fees. What we saw at the very start of the pandemic was a handful of agencies were sending out emails talking about the fees and asking interpreters to take a blanket cut in their fees. So this one that you can see on the right here is from a large organisation with many public sector contracts. They were asking spoken language interpreters to take a blanket 15% reduction in their fees. So no questions asked, just expect interpreters to take a cut for no reason other than it was a pandemic. So their costs hadn't necessarily gone up or down, they just had staff to pay for, and interpreters were expected to take the hit to make sure that their profits were stable. So, and as you can see here on the left from Slater, which is a great website for news on industry for interpreting, is that some of the agencies, it was the same one actually, that sent out information asking interpreters to only get paid for the time that they actually worked. So for example, if it was a police or a court booking and you were booked between say 10 to 12 in the morning, but you only actually interpreted say for a hearing or an interview that only lasted 15 minutes, you would only be paid for 15 minutes. And as we know, this is completely unsustainable. Interpreters can't be expected to book out time but only be paid for 15 minutes of that.
I think also it just highlights the difference between spoken language interpreters and sign language interpreters. And one of the reasons that we've been able to challenge and not accept these sort of terms is because we're a small profession, and if we work collectively, then we are able to keep and maintain our fees, terms and conditions. Whereas the spoken language interpreters, there's vast amount of interpreters, and so they just don't have the strength in numbers that we do.
So the old versus the new economy and what this means for interpreting. So for around about 40 years, our economy in Britain has been based on larger companies, say conglomerates, with shareholders at the top. And it's the interests of shareholders that dictate how the business runs. So shareholders get paid dividends. In order to get paid more in dividends for their investment as shareholders, profit margins have to increase. So what we've seen, for example, with utility companies, so gas, water, electric, train companies included, the price that the public pays for those services increases so that shareholders are able to get more and more from their dividends. So what we see is that assets and equity, the money, flows upwards and outwards. What we've seen in interpreting is that with the global or national providers, what happens is that the profits come in and then they're paid to shareholders or owners of the company that do not live in the region. So the assets and the money flows, the profits are made, it's termed an extractive economy. Money is taken out of the area and is paid elsewhere, so it doesn't stay within the area. The wealth doesn't stay within the area. And what happens is that the needs of those shareholders, i.e. to make a profit, and the needs of the community, so for us, the deaf community and the interpreting community, they're misaligned. They're not the same thing. If we get in more profits, then we want those to be reinvested in the community or paid back to those that own the business rather than the shareholders. So that's a really great report as well from the New Economics Foundation. So out with the old. Does the current system work for organisations, deaf people or interpreters, including the entire of the interpreting profession? Nikki's shaking her head. Of course it doesn't. So with the likes of the very large global agencies, Language Line, national agencies, people like the Big Word that have come in to start doing sign language interpreting as of 10 years ago, which was when contracting and what the so-called one-stop shop, so spoken language agencies coming in and doing British Sign Language as a loss leader in order to gain large contracts. That doesn't work for any of our communities, and it doesn't work for local communities. So we're set up in Merseyside, where we believe that the need is the greatest for a cooperative, and it certainly doesn't work for the Merseyside community, because those profits are taken out of the area and they're spent elsewhere by the people that are making a profit out of us. So, and also the deaf community doesn't have a say in how those services are run. So the evidence that we have that interpreting is not currently working for our communities, we have the Nubsley's dossier of disgrace. British Deaf Association has done several reports. Action on Hearing Loss have done some. A while ago, we had the Department of Health Towards Equity and Access, which was about mental health and access. We have Sign How Sick of It report, and more recently we published our report, Signing the Right Path, which we did a survey in Merseyside of health professionals, deaf people and interpreters, so the 3 users of interpreting services, and that report can be found on our website.
And just to say, we will be sending out a reading list as well for anyone who's interested in any of the things we've been talking about.
So, in with the new. What does the new economy mean? It's not actually that new. People have been talking about social enterprises, and we had a Public Services Social Value Act. The legislation came into force in 2013, but it's actually the Public Services Social Value Act of 2012. And what that talks about is, and we'll talk about it a bit more later, but it's about ensuring that any money that is paid for public services, the value of which benefits the society as well. And to make sure that money and the extractive economy doesn't take money out of that, of society, and go nowhere. It stays within the community. We also have local commissioning guidelines, which have become strengthened as we go along. In Merseyside, we've also got local industry strategies as well to ensure that the area regenerates. And we have, you may know already about the NHS guidance for commissioners for interpreting and translation in primary care. So primary care being not hospitals, but GPs, physio, podiatry, those kind of services, your frontline services. So the ethos behind all of this is about community businesses. So Signalise as a cooperative fits within that. You may have heard of the term B Corp, which are more the companies, but with a more social enterprise bent. They have rules and regulations that ensure that they are ethical. We also have charities and voluntary and community organisations. So community wealth building. So that's the opposite of extractive models of business, where the profits that come in to a business ensure that the wealth stays within the community. So that could be the community of deaf people and interpreters, or it could also be the wider community. So any money paid into, for example, we mentioned there the Preston model. So if Preston has a contract with the business and there's community wealth building, the money stays within Preston and doesn't go out to a national or a global business. We'll also show you a clip a bit later about the post-COVID-19 economy and what that might mean. What we're all sort of headed towards, hopefully, which is a better type of business, a more social enterprise type of business that's going to benefit communities and society a lot more. And this is all about offering more value for society. So when public sectors, organisations pay money for a contract, where does that money go? How is it benefiting society? Where is the value in that? And here's the clip.
One fascinating aspect of discussion at the moment is the number of business leaders who are already talking in terms of new models, new paradigms. I think there's a lot of willingness to explore imaginative new solutions and more inclusive, more sustainable solutions.
While many businesses were shutting down, Co-op was stocking up. It needed 5,000 extra workers in lockdown. Co-op Group is owned not by shareholders but by its members. It's a different model of organising a business, one that makes its boss accountable for more than just growth.
I'll be very much assessed by the social impacts that I can have in communities.
by how much money we can raise for good causes, by where our efforts go around campaigning. And so it's a far more deeper, richer assessment than possibly a PLC CEO might go through.
The cooperative model is one that may have broader lessons for business.
In those first 5 years of difficult startup, twice as many co-ops survive than the normal business. And therefore, it suggests to me that our way of working, our governance, our accountability is a better way of doing business. That way of working will chime with a new zeitgeist of how business is run.
On a good day, I try to imagine that we will be thanking COVID-19 for giving us an opportunity to rethink those issues.
And what do we ultimately want from our COVID economy?
So as we can see there on the clip, there seems to be this new push now where profits aren't just paid to shareholders, but they're offering much more to society and communities. So when we talk about social value, we can see a quote here from Chris White, who's an MP who set up the Social Value Act. So it's not about just thinking about value in terms of costs, money, financial, but there's a much wider sense of value. It's about, and it's called the triple impact, the social, environmental and economic value that those kind of contracts have to offer society. So you can read more about there's a link there as well. So we've included a quote here from Equal Care Co-op, who are a relatively new platform cooperative. We'll explain a bit more about those. They are set up to deliver direct caring support. So they have a community of carers and a community of people that need care, and they're all about matching those two parts of the community up in a local area. So this is all about community and social value. And they say here, it puts power in the hands of those who matter most, the people who give and receive care and support. So,
cooperatives.
Go on, Nikki.
Sorry, Jen. What are they? So I'll just give you a very brief history of co-ops, just because I find it interesting. So Rochdale in 1844 is the first recognised co-op, and there was a group of 28 men, weavers and other trades who came together to form a new cooperative society. And the reason for that was increased pressure from the changing market system, and that was what drove their decision to set up a cooperative. Now, I'm sure that sounds quite familiar with what we're going through at the moment. So the aim of cooperatives are very much at the time to challenge unfair working conditions and unfair prices. There's a new international, there was at the time, a new international cooperative alliance, which was formed in 1895 by one of the Rochdale founders, and that was to help people establish and maintain self-governing workshops. And that is still in operation today, and it's still around now, so 200 years later, which shows that the model works. So co-ops work for their members. They distribute profits fairly and reinvest. There's at the moment, there's a fight against the gig economy. We're going to explain all that later. And the Rochdale principles, when they're established, they agreed 7 core principles, and they are still in existence today, and they still govern cooperatives and how they work. And I'll quickly run through those. They're voluntary and open membership, democratic membership control, members' economic participation, autonomy and independence, education, training and information, cooperation amongst cooperatives, and the last one is concern for the community.
So there are several different types of cooperatives. These are just 4 of them. They're the main 4. So worker cooperatives. We're going to go through some examples of cooperatives, and I'll explain a bit more of the different types there. But workers are So it could be maybe a food delivery cooperative where the community members aren't necessarily members, it's just the people working for the co-op. Multi-stakeholder cooperatives, which is what Signalise is. So we have not just interpreter members, because that would make it a worker cooperative, but we also have deaf community members. We think that's really important, that deaf people for the very first time are part of a business as members and owners of the business. That's why we thought it was really important to have a multi-stakeholder cooperative, and that's actually quite exciting. So, and then there's also consortium cooperatives, which are groups of worker cooperatives as a consortium. And then community benefit societies are run for the benefit of the community, obviously, but not just the members that are part of the society, but also the wider community. And here we have lots of different types of cooperatives in existence. So we can see on the left there, obviously you heard about that from the video as well, the cooperative, so the co-op shop. John Lewis is considered a co-op because some of the employees are members and they get profits paid back to them. Some people would argue it's not a proper cooperative. There's the Nationwide Building Society, which operates for its members. Suma is a food cooperative. It has a shop. It sells whole foods. So the people that are members of that cooperative are workers. It's a worker cooperative. Stretford Public Hall is a community hall. So they got funding to buy the hall, maintain it, and it's run for the benefit of the community. So it runs community events. The Ivy House is a pub. There are quite a few pub cooperatives. So these are perhaps pubs that were shutting down, and the community said, no, we think it's really important to have a pub in our local community. We're going to raise the funds, buy this. So raise the funds from the community to buy the pub and run it as a community. And then on the right, we have some platform cooperatives. So people that operate via a website or an app. We have Signalise, that's us. We're creating the app with our users at the moment. We have the Interpreting Collective, which is our spoken language interpreter colleagues who have set up their cooperative. We have Equal Care Co-op, which we mentioned before. So they're running a cooperative for carers and people receiving care. Resonate is a music streaming service. So this isn't owned by shareholders, but the people that create the music themselves. So it's the alternative to Apple Music and Spotify. As you may know, people on Spotify or Apple Music get paid very little, and there's been lots of uproar by artists about how much profit they get from the service. So Resonate was set up in direct opposition to that. And Up and Go is a platform cooperative, very nice website. They're based in New York, and that's a cooperative of cleaners, so another worker cooperative. So platform cooperatives, you can see there are several types of cooperative. Platform cooperatives are ones that use a website or an app. So this is Signalise. We believe that a platform is the only way that we will be able to run, still maintain interpreters' fees and a sustainable profession, but keep the costs lower, because a lot of the booking and registration of interpreters becomes more automated, but done in a safe, user-friendly way. So that's what we're working on right now. This is a brilliant book written by Treba Schultz and Nathan Schneider. They're operating out of New York. They started the movement of platform cooperativism in around 2012-13. They started to have conferences. So they have a conference every single year. They are running courses at the moment. So if you know anyone running a different type of business that you want to become a cooperative, I would encourage you to join the next cohort that's coming up quite soon. So as with normal cooperatives, we rely on democratic decision making and shared ownership, but this is about shared ownership of the platform and the business itself. Just going to talk very briefly about technology. So internet, what we might term the first stage of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, very militarized solution, and it was all about messaging each other. Very, very basic. What that developed into was Internet 2.0, it is known as. So Internet 2.0 is very much what we know the internet and technology to be right now. So we're talking about Apple, Google, Netflix, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, the big guns that have emerged from Internet 2.0. It was all supposed to be about users benefiting people. Actually, what Internet 2.0 has turned into, very large companies. So we have Apple was the very first $1 trillion company. Amazon followed suit. These are corporations that perhaps don't pay tax. We might know them as tax avoiders. They also, when it comes to data, present a rather large problem. Our data doesn't become owned by us anymore. So there are new platforms emerging to replace the social network sites like Twitter and Facebook. As we know, we have problems like Cambridge Analytica. They were data harvesting. There's been selling of our data. We don't know about a lot of the stuff that goes on. It's become a lot more political as well. So the Russian trolling, the report that was heavily redacted that came out recently, took it forever to come out. No, the government didn't want it to come out. This is about how other governments influence our elections, how they gain access to our data, how they set up trolls and bots to influence people and their thinking for the benefit of either other countries or our own governments. So Internet 3.0 is what we're kind of coming into. So this is something, people's awareness of big data and the political influence in the current form of the internet is becoming a lot more knowledgeable. It's about what we want from our internet. This is, do we want it to be publicly owned? Do we want our services to benefit us, or do we want them to benefit large companies that don't pay tax? So this Internet 3.0 is kind of where platform cooperativism sits within that kind of philosophy about we own the internet, we own services, and we run them for the benefit of us.
So I'm sure most of you will have heard the term gig economy, but may not necessarily know what it actually means. So we thought we'd just quickly run through that with you. So the gig economy gets its name from each piece of work being akin to an individual gig, although such work can fall under multiple names. It's previously been called the sharing economy, mostly in reference to platforms such as Airbnb, and the collaborative economy. However, its core are app-based platforms that dole out work in bits and pieces, making deliveries, driving passengers, or cleaning homes. I'm sure you all know which ones they're referring to, and leading some to prefer the term platform economy. So the gig economy has got a very bad name, particularly with unions, and that some companies are using it to manipulate and control the market and leading to very poor working terms and conditions for their users. So, but it's not all bad. So we wanted to explain the gig economy to make sure you are informed about the bad side of it, but it can be used for good. And that's, Jen's going to explain that now. Oops.
So tech for good is a term that's becoming more and more popular. It's about using technology for the better, not for the worst. So tech for good is all about social enterprises using technology. Now, since the pandemic, this kind of trend has gone through the roof. There are all sorts of funds available now to help charities, social enterprises, voluntary and community organisations transition to digitalising their services. And where interpreting sits in this is that we have to be really careful, as Nikki was explaining before about video remote interpreting. We need to make sure that that works for deaf people and it works for interpreters, and that it's not done to the detriment of either of our groups or the interpreting profession as a whole. So Tech for Good is about people, projects, organisations and funders all coming together to promote those triple impacts that I described before, so social, environmental and economic outcomes. So, reimagining the future for interpreting, what could it be like for us? So why have a cooperative for interpreting? What we realised when we were doing the work with Nubsley is that a lot of us would talk about, why can't the hospital just book us direct? If you've joined any of the webinars recently for the framework agreements, you might have seen all of the chatter going on in the background, via the chat channel. Why can't people just book us direct? Unfortunately, it's not ever going to work that way, because somebody sitting in a hospital can't phone round a list of interpreters because they have important jobs to do and they don't have the time to do that. And anyone who's tried to book an interpreter direct will know how time consuming that is. So we have to kind of sit in that sort of ethos of procurement, contracting, frameworks. That's currently how things are done. Without a legal entity run by interpreters and deaf people, we're not going to be able to gain those contracts. So Signalise as a cooperative has been set up to do exactly that, to have a legal entity where we can work together in a way that is sustainable for the benefit of interpreters and deaf people, that also gives public sector organisations what they need, which is a way to book interpreters to fulfil their statutory duties on access. There is legislation in place, as we all know, that deaf people need access in an equal way to other people. And so they need interpreting services, and we have to be able to produce something that can enable them to do that easily and readily in a sustainable way and a cost-effective way that is also sustainable for interpreting. This is about allowing deaf people to have a say in a business that they own and run, and also interpreters. It's a way of community wealth building, which is what we mentioned before. So the money that comes in from contracts and ad hoc bookings into the cooperative after maintenance of the platform and any other costs is ring-fenced for that local community, and that we use those profits to improve access, to improve training and support for interpreters, to use those profits in a way that members vote on so that we benefit everybody involved in the cooperative. It's about creating social change. So innovation comes from the ground up, from the people that know best what they need or how to run services, i.e. the end suppliers, the interpreters. So when we talk about a value chain, the end users, deaf people, and the end suppliers, interpreters, are at the bottom of that chain. We're on the ground. We know how to do interpreting services from the ground up. It's not about somebody creating a framework and saying this is what you have to deliver. It's about us being able to say there's a different way that we could do this in a way that benefits everybody, and that we can improve access for deaf people. So I've mentioned training and support for interpreters, and it's also about working with the deaf communities, that they're aware of their rights to access, what the legislation is currently, and how the cooperative can ensure that they have those rights. And also working together as two communities to influence government policy in the longer term.
I think it's a case of, at the moment, the tail's wagging the dog, and we want the dog to start wagging the tail again and to make sure the people that actually know what our needs are in control again.
So this is how you can contact us. Please do, if you see anything come out and you like the ethos of the cooperative, please do share, retweet, talk to your friends, join the newsletter. The links are on the Twitter feed and the bio and everything, so you should be able to access those. You can also sign up via our website. So thank you very much for joining us today. We will have the reading list for you as well when this goes out. We're also going to produce a summary sign language version as well, so that anyone in the deaf community that's interested has access to that. We're aware a lot of this information is very interpreter heavy, so we're going to do a summary so deaf people aren't left out. So thank you very much for joining us today, and do keep in touch.
Thank you.